White as snow, red as blood. Chapter 10. Rose paced outside of Snow's door. It was cracked open so she could hear Nathaniel's muffled voice speaking to Snow. A team of maids was also in the room, so Rose didn't want to overwhelm her sister. She was confident Nathaniel was already coddling Snow enough. When Rose heard footsteps, she turned towards them, not surprised to see Richard approaching her. The sight of him made her stiffen even more. She hadn't spoken to him since they kissed, and she had accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation that made her head spin earlier that morning, the conversation between Elijah and the Queen. She knew something was different about Richard's curse and that Elijah and Queen Astrid were romantically involved. How long their romance extended, she couldn't say for sure. During the entirety of Chief Elijah's lesson, Rose wondered what she should do with the information. In fact, Rose blamed herself for Snow's poisoning. Her thoughts distracted her, and she wished she had paid more attention to her sister's actions. She might have stopped Snow from coming into contact with the Karoo flower. That, of course, wouldn't have mattered. Richard stopped about 2 feet in front of her, worry lines forming between his brows. "How is she?" Rose clutched her arms close to her chest. Being smothered with more attention than she wants, no doubt. His lips lifted slightly at the joke, and then he stepped closer. "And you?" She turned to the door, gripping her arms so tightly that she left red marks. Despite herself, she began to cry. Without hesitation, Richard pulled her into his chest, tenderly holding the back of her head while his other hand traced a small circle between her shoulder blades. "I should have noticed sooner," she cried, letting out her frustration. "But you did notice, Rose." "And she's safe," Richard whispered. Rose cried some more, unable to speak. While Richard continued to soothe her, he spotted a guard down the hall. The man started to approach them, but as soon as he figured out what was happening, he awkwardly turned the other way. If they remained here, it would only cause further embarrassment for everyone involved. Slowly, Richard moved his hands to her forearms. She continued to hug herself, and her eyes were cast down at their shoes, allowing Richard to see only the top of her head. "Hey, let's get you somewhere more private." After a slight nod, Rose shifted her feet and allowed Richard to guide her. Her tears dripped onto the floor after every step they took until they reached her room. She wandered in while Richard held the door open. Gloomily, she planted her bottom on a light green couch and picked a decorative pillow to hug instead of her arms. Richard remained by the door, wanting to stay but realizing it would be best to leave. Snow and Nathaniel had maids flocking around them where he and Rose were completely alone. It didn't look good, and despite knowing she was in distress, his mind lingered on their kiss. As he was about to dismiss himself, Rose sniffled, and any thought of leaving her vanished. He adjusted the door so it was left halfway open. Once satisfied, he sat on the couch, giving Rose plenty of space. However, as soon as he was seated, Rose's pillow flopped down on his lap, followed by her head. He froze, unsure where to put his right hand. The left easily draped across the armrest while the right debated between the backrest or her shoulder. He tried the backrest for a second, but when her head tilted up, his instincts told him that's not what she wanted. Hurriedly, he moved his hand and stroked her thick, black hair that spread out across the pillow. Rose relaxed, silently approving his actions. After Rose's sniffles ceased, she asked, "How long have you known Chief Elijah?" Richard stopped brushing his fingers through her hair. It was an odd question to ask unless she thought Elijah was responsible for what happened to Snow. "My whole life." "Why? Do you think he purposefully poisoned Snow?" She sat up, realizing her mistake. Naturally, he would think her question was connected to Snow's poisoning, as she had given him no context. "No. It's just. I overheard him and your mother talking this morning." They seemed romantically involved. She paused, waiting for his reaction and wondering if she should mention what they said about him. However, the more she stared, the more similarities she noticed between him and Elijah. Her thoughts changed course before she dismissed them. His eyes and hair were identical to his mother's, so it meant nothing. I wouldn't be surprised, he finally said, leaning his elbows on the pillow. It's about time they both find someone. He's always had a lonely look in his eye. Mother, too. Rose thoughtfully pressed her hand against her cheek. She doubted he would consider his mother was unfaithful to his father, if the king was his father. But if Elijah was Richard's biological father, did that information connect to Richard's curse? And your curse, did you change into a bear like Nathaniel? They locked eyes, and Richard automatically said, no. Rose frowned, but weren't you affected by the same potion? Richard sighed, leaning back. I don't pretend to understand how potions work. But I started changing into an animal around the same time, so that's the only explanation my parents and I could devise. And Benjamin, our head magician, confirmed Framsey worked on multiple transformation potions, one of which was related to the creature I turned into. So the centaur's name was Framsey? And you haven't transformed since Nathaniel killed him, right? Richard nodded, that's correct. Good, Rose breathed, her nerves settling. She didn't think he would lie to her, and he didn't. Regardless, she didn't understand why his mother would insist Elijah continue administering the potion secretly. Was that potion for something else? If so, why would Richard have looked at it when discussing his curse? What is this all about? Rose stood. My mere curiosity is all, especially after our conversation last night. And I'm sorry about what I did. Richard rose out of his seat, standing taller than her. Which part? She cringed. What part was she apologizing for? The kiss or how she covered it up? In a way, it was both. She should have controlled herself or used her words to tell him how she felt instead of throwing herself at him like some desperate gold digger. As for hiding the kiss from Nathaniel and Snow, it was pathetic and unnecessary. Nathaniel would tease Rose no matter if she fell for Richard or not. At this rate, Nathaniel would be her brother-in-law, and there would be no end to his matchmaking unless she admitted to liking Richard. I'm sorry I pretended and didn't just tell you how I felt. And how do you feel? He asked, his voice choking out the last word. She shut her eyes. The poor guy was nervous. She had hoped her kiss would speak for itself, but after she dismissed it, she supposed he had reason to be confused. I am interested in you, she muttered, then clarified, her eyes flashing open. I mean, I'm interested romantically. Not as good buddies or anything like that. Admittedly, I thought you were handsome from the start, though I was worried about your sanity. Then again, I worried about my sisters, too, followed by my own. Richard smiled, his jitters dissipating as he let out a laugh. Rose clamped her mouth shut while he continued to roar with laughter. Finally, he said. Well, the feeling is mutual, though I've never questioned your sanity. Maybe you should. Well, that does bring up a good point. Who kisses a man right after he says he was cursed? See? I am insane, she stated proudly, lifting her chin. Richard shook his head in disbelief. That's not something to boast about. Anyway, I'll kick Nathaniel out so you can see Snow. Rose smiled, liking the idea. I'd like that. They drifted to the door. Before Richard could swing it all the way open, Rose grasped his hand. He paused and stared into her dark maroon eyes. Without saying anything, they both leaned forward and kissed a second time, the door hiding their affection. When they broke away, Richard whispered, You know, I plan to tell my mother about us. It won't be easy, and she'll want to spend more time with you. So, tell me now if you want to wait a little longer. Rose brushed his rough cheeks. He shaved daily, but it didn't stop his facial hair from growing. Let's wait before telling the Queen, at least until Snow is well, Rose said, wanting time to solve the mysteries surrounding Richard's family and to know if a life with him was what she wanted. He nodded and stepped out into the hall, the door fully opened. Rose followed him, walking down to Snow's room. As expected, Nathaniel was still by Snow's bedside while Natty watched them at a bay window. The rest of the maids were long gone. Natty stood when she noticed Richard and Rose. She bowed to Richard, and her actions gained Nathaniel's attention. He turned his head but remained seated on the edge of Snow's bed, holding her hand. Richard approached his brother and whispered, "Let Rose take over for now. You can come back later." Nathaniel spared a glance at the sleeping Snow before nodding solemnly. He stood, and Rose took his place. The two men and Natty left the room, leaving the girls alone. Snow shifted, and her eyes opened. Rose smirked and made herself comfortable on the bed, rolling to the other side. She got under the covers before she pinched Snow's cheeks. "Pretending to sleep, were you?" Snow chuckled, "Just a light rest was all." "I'm sorry I worried everyone." Rose's smile faded. "Did you really come into contact with the Karu flower, Snow? I should have been watching, but you wouldn't normally make that kind of mistake." Snow shuffled closer, her head nearing the edge of her pillow. "I've been thinking about it too. I can't pinpoint when I might have messed up. My mind was elsewhere while my hands automatically did what they were trained to do." "Oh yeah? So where was your mind at?" Snow chewed down on her lip. Well. I learned quite a bit today and don't know what to make of it." "You know that potion?" "Yeah. Well, I think it contains wolfsbane. And I ran into the head magician at the library. He shared his insights on the poison and on the centaur. Apparently, Framsey not only stole from the royal family, but he worked for them as the previous head magician." Rose twisted onto her back, processing the information. "So let me guess, Richard must turn into a wolf, not a bear." "That's what I concluded as well." "Has he said anything else about it to you since last night?" "Only that he hasn't transformed since Nathaniel's return." Rose looked back at her sister. "But I overheard Elijah and the Queen this morning. Apparently, they have plans to marry once Richard is on the throne." Snow raised her eyebrows but didn't say anything. She knew there was more Rose wanted to share. "I told Richard about their relationship, and it doesn't seem to bother him. Though it shouldn't, considering his father passed away and the Queen is still fairly young. However, there was something I didn't tell him because I wasn't sure what it meant." Elijah discussed how he hadn't found a lasting cure for Richard and that they needed to secretly administer the one they did have. "You think they were referring to the wolfsbane potion," Snow stated. "What else could it be? But Richard assured me his curse was over, so I don't know why they would keep giving the potion to him." "Well, if they are secretly giving it to him from now on, then clearly his curse is different from Nathaniel's, and it isn't something Richard would know about either." Rose sighed. "I hope that's not the case. He has a right to know if it is." "Rose, be careful. This may not be something we should explore further. We might end up with an enemy we didn't plan to make." Rose's gut fell as she considered how intertwined they were in the royal family's affairs and the possibility Snow's poisoning wasn't an accident. And what if it's too late for that? Red Rose formed a ridiculously dangerous plan, and somehow, she had gotten Snow to play along. A couple of weeks had passed since Snow's poisoning, and Elijah gave her the go-ahead to return to work after her second day of rest. During this time, the girls kept their eyes and ears peeled, especially when anyone mentioned anything about Chief Elijah, Richard, or the Queen. Thus far, both of the sisters had little to report. However, Snow completed more research on wolf transformation and found a connection to the full moon. They hadn't seen Elijah touch the wolf's bane potion, and none of the bottles were missing. They believed there was a chance Richard only changed during a full moon, and tonight was a full moon. The girls kept their eyes on Elijah like hawks as they prepared other medicines the entire morning, but he never came close to approaching the top-shelf vials. Then, around noon, Richard strolled up to the front counter. Snow and Rose immediately paused in their work, slowly peeking out of the preparation room's doorway. Richard noticed them but remained focused on Chief Elijah, who operated the front counter. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Elijah asked with a smile. "It's that time." Elijah sniffed. "Your Highness, you no longer need your medication, remember?" Richard placed his hand on his head, acting out the part of a forgetful fool. "Oh, that's right. Sorry, guess it's just a habit." "Please, you are a horrible liar." "The girls are in the back." The prince cringed but didn't deny Elijah's words. The chief herbalist rolled his eyes and jabbed a thumb towards the preparation room. Richard walked in while the girls hurriedly moved their hands to look busy. The encounter between Elijah and Richard may not have been long, but it told Rose what she needed to know. Elijah wasn't going to openly give the potion to Richard, and today was the day he needed to take it. "How are you, Snow?" Richard asked, stopping at the doorway. Snow smiled before offering him a curtsy. "I am doing better, Your Highness. Thank you for coming all the way here to check on me." "Well, my mother has been keeping Nathaniel busy lately, so I thought I would slip off for him." Richard strolled further into the room, coming closer to Rose. The girls heard a crinkle and spotted a note clasped in Richard's hand. He passed it off to Rose, and she shoved it into her apron pocket. Snow made no mention of the secret exchange as she climbed a ladder to put a finished product away on the shelf. "That's very thoughtful of you," Snow said, keeping the conversation going. "You can tell him not to worry." Rose snorted. "That's never going to happen. It's a miracle he's stayed away this long." Elijah entered the room, clapping his hands and rubbing them together. "Since the prince clearly won't be going anytime soon, how about you girls take a break?" They could hardly say no, so Snow and Rose stored away what materials they could and left the preparation room with Richard. Before Rose left, she glanced back to see Elijah moving the ladder toward the wolf's bane vials. She didn't linger any longer, going over to the fireplace in the main entrance. Snow took a seat on a padded chair where customers usually waited if there was a line. Rose, however, joined Richard by the fireplace. When she raised her hands to the warm flames, he glanced at her with a gleam in his eye. "This is where we met about a month ago." "Yes, and life hasn't been the same since," she remarked, then her hand drifted into her apron pocket. She felt the note tucked inside and pulled it out, glancing down at it. Richard watched her movements but didn't stop her from exposing it. No one else was around to see it besides Snow, whose eyes were set on the preparation room. It was a short message, so it took Rose less than a second to read it. "Stable 6 o'clock. No, it has not. But the weather is less frigid. It would make for a good ride up the mountain, which reminds me, you haven't gathered everything from your home, have you?" Richard asked, his words taking on a double meaning. Rose let the note fall back into her pocket and stuck her hands out again. "We have not. Your mother has been very good to us, so there was little reason to go. However, there are some items I'd like to retrieve. Perhaps I'll go later today." Snow whipped her head in their direction but turned back to the preparation room when Elijah emerged with a tray of drinks. He approached the group, offering a cup to Richard first. Rose and Snow made eye contact as they simultaneously thought the potion was mixed inside the drink. "Here, try this and tell me what you think," Elijah said before handing the other 2 glasses to Rose and Snow. Richard swirled the liquid, studying its strange purple color. His was slightly darker than Rose and Snow's drinks, but only a practiced eye could tell the difference. "What is it?" "A medicine for small children. I need to know if it tastes all right." Rose stared at Richard's glass, thinking at full speed. The only way to prove Richard's curse wasn't broken was by witnessing him change. If that happened, he wouldn't even be able to deny it. That meant he could not take the potion. "Well, if we're going to do this, Chief, don't you want to record our impressions?" Rose asked. Chief Elijah took the bait. He held up a finger, telling them to wait, and ran in the direction of his room to grab his journal, ink, and a quill. Rose faced Richard and handed him her glass. "Hold this for a second." He did without question, watching as she bent down and tightened her bootlaces. When she stood, she grabbed Richard's cup instead of the one she originally possessed. Believing the glasses contained the same ingredients, Richard made no comment about the switch. "Thanks," she remarked with a bewitching smile. Snow narrowed her eyes at Rose, not remembering this part of the plan. She thought they were just confirming Elijah gave Richard the potion, not preventing Richard from taking it. Snow also worried about what the potion would do to Rose. Most likely nothing, but it still contained a dangerous poison. When Elijah returned, he eagerly lifted his quill and gestured for them to drink. All at once, the 3 lifted their small glasses to their lips. Richard took one large gulp while Snow sipped. Rose let the liquid barely touch her lips before deciding she needed to drink it all as well. She tossed her head back further, cleaning the glass so Elijah couldn't tell she took Richard's. "And?" Elijah asked impatiently. Richard smacked his lips, trying to get the taste out of his mouth. "Still gross and earthy." Snow finished hers before adding, "Maybe if you added more juice. Or even honey to make it sweet." Rose nodded, "Yeah, that might do the trick. Sugar could work, too." Elijah sighed, writing nothing down in his journal. "I can't add too much, or else they'll beg for more." Rose collected the empty glasses from Snow and Richard. "Then, it looks like you've got work to do, Chief." "More like we," Elijah said, then stared at Richard. "You're welcome to stay, Your Highness. But if you do, you'll have to taste test with the girls." Richard, having completed his goal, made a run for it. "Oh, no. I really should get back before my mother notices I'm gone." Chief Elijah grinned as the prince fled. Meanwhile, Rose happily took the 3 glasses in the back room to wash them. When she met with Richard tonight, she would know with absolute certainty if his curse was broken or not. However, a part of her wondered what that would mean for the days ahead, especially if the curse was still active. If Richard wasn't cursed by Framsey, then who was responsible for his condition?